A very good afternoon, Ambassador Gopinath Pillai, Chairman of ISAS and Ambassador at Large, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Professor Subrata Mitra, Director of ISAS, distinguished panelists, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Taisha and I have the pleasure to be your MC today. Welcome to this afternoon's ISAS Symposium on Demonetisation of the Indian Rupee, Objective and Impacts. It is my pleasure now to invite Professor Subrata Mitra, Director of the Institute of South Asian Studies, NUS, to give the welcome address.
Ambassador Sri Gopinath Pillai, our chairman, distinguished members of the panel, Mr. Jahangir Aziz, Dr. Jahangir Aziz, head of EM Asia Economic Research, JP Morgan, and Mr. Abhijit Ghosh, partner, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Singapore, and from our home team, Dr. Subbarao, distinguished visiting fellow of ISAS and former governor of the Reserve Bank of India, and Dr. Amitendu Palit. Ladies and gentlemen, two questions are uppermost in my mind as I face you. The first is, in demonetization, might India have scored an own goal? As you all know, India was doing reasonably well in terms of the rates of growth, beating in China marginally and in terms of percentages, but nevertheless, for a while one could say we are ahead of China. And in spite of the many political problems, the country was more or less on an even keel, getting ready for Christmas and the New Year. And this thing has set up, has opened a Pandora's box of problems. That's one argument. The other argument is, when the dust settles on it all, India will come out of it better off. So there are two camps, and I'm not going to tell you which camp is right, which is why we are here, and we have these four distinguished panelists who will enlighten us, so that when I come back here to talk about our takeaways, I look towards you and ask, so have you found your answer? So that's the first question. I can't answer it. But the second question is a question dear to my heart and I can answer it. The second question is demonetization a good thing for ISAS? To which my resounding answer will be, of course, yes. It's demonetization which makes it possible for us to be in this building and not in our forlorn little corner in the Hengwikeng Terrace on the NUS campus. It's demonetization which has brought you all here. And it's demonetization which makes it possible for ISAS to claim its mandate back, which is to be at the center of things happening in India and in South Asia and connect them to Singapore, so that the Singapore stakeholders can make sense of what is happening in India, because those things are right now very, very important to Singapore. Just as Singapore is very important to India in terms of foreign direct investment, so is the Indian economy and India's global network also important to Singapore in this time of rising Asian rivalry, of major seismic changes in the EU, in the UK, and of course the United States. These are the various things why ISAS has been mandated to serve Singapore, and we do this not only in the area of trade and industry and foreign policy, but also in the area of governance. And as you all know, demonetization is at the heart of financial governance. I mean, can you have one state and many economies, some of them manipulated by forces inimical to the country from outside? As a political scientist, I would argue the challenge is to have a governance which brings under one roof both the money supply as well as the political forces operating within the country. Now, these are the number of issues that we'll be having an opportunity to discuss. We will listen to the panelists and we'll engage the panelists, because that is what ISAS is here for. It is here to enhance the capacity of Singaporeans to think in an analytical way about what happens in South Asia. I'm saying analytical because that's the mandate. It says clearly, you are to connect with South Asia, not in a very short term, journalists do that kind of thing, nor in at the very long term, which is what I have done for the last 43 years of my life as an academic. By the time you publish your book, things have moved on. The ministries of Foreign Affairs and Trade and Industry, who are our main supporters, expect us to be active analytically and in terms of policy and processes in the middle term. And that's why we have organized a panel where you have experts talking about not just what happened, but their implications. Implications for India and implications for other forces that are cutting through India. These then, ladies and gentlemen, are what the event is about. So we would be listening to the panelists, and then there will be a question-answer session, which Dr. Palit will moderate, and we have provided for a good, by Singapore standards, very generous half an hour, so that we would emerge from here, I hope, with clarity where there is confusion. With these words, I wish you all an engaging time today and look forward to a vigorous conversation. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Professor Mitra. Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to invite the following distinguished panelists on stage for the panel discussion. Dr. Amitendu Palit, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of South Asian Studies, NUS, will be chairing the discussion today. Our panelists are Dr. Duvvuri Subbarao, Distinguished Visiting Fellow, ISIS, and former Governor of the Reserve Bank of India. We also have with us Dr. Jahangir Aziz, Global Head of Emerging Market Economic Research at JP Morgan Bank. We also have Mr. Abhijit Ghosh, Partner at PwC, Singapore. I will now hand over to Dr. Palit, who will chair the session.
Thank you very much, Aisha, and it's just about a month since a particular day which is now being popularly referred to as the second 9/11 or 11/9, the 9th of November, for two events, and it is up to you to decide which one is more significant than the other. The first is the election of Mr. Donald Trump as the President of the United States of America. And the second is the subject that we are discussing today. So it's your call to decide which one is more important, but I gather that for this particular audience, this at least is an equally significant topic for discussion as it is for many in a 1.2 billion person large economy that is India. We could have probably done this seminar earlier, but we thought it will be good to take a look at the way events have unfolded in India since the 9th of November. There's a lot of reaction that has come in. There's a lot that has been written. There are many experts whom we did not know that they existed, but they have subsequently come up giving their expert opinions after demonetization happened. But I think there are two factors which I think are worth sharing with you before we go on to this subject. The first is, today probably we are in a position, after a lot having been spoken and written and shared on the subject, we are in a position to take a fairly objective view of this whole subject. The demonetization of the Indian rupee, what has been its objectives, what are its impacts, and we can probably take a medium term, if not a long term view, because in the long term we are all dead. And the second point is, it's actually remarkable that we are doing this discussion outside India. And if you take a look at the panel, me included and my distinguished colleagues all here included, we are from India, but we were all in Singapore at the time when this discussion is taking place, and which actually reflects the fact that Singapore has such a great hub of experts capable of commenting on India at a particular point in time, that it's not really difficult to put together a discussion of distinguished panelists and commentators on a subject of such significance. I haven't come across this subject being discussed anywhere in the form of a seminar or a debate. Forget about India, not anywhere else in the world till now. So in a sense, I think we are the first mover in this. This will go down as the first institutional effort to look objectively at the subject of demonetization. So without taking further time, the pattern that we are following here today is that I'll request each of my distinguished panelists to give their views on this subject in whatever perspective, approach and form they prefer, for about 10 to 12 minutes. After that, we will open the floor for discussion. I'll probably just try to warm up things if they are not warm enough, by asking some leading questions to my panelists, fellow panelists on both sides, and then we will have an open house. So let me, without wasting further time, invite Dr. Duvvuri Subbarao, the former Governor of the Reserve Bank of India and currently distinguished visiting fellow at the Institute of South Asian Studies. Who can be more appropriate than Dr. Rao to comment on this subject? Sir.
Thank you, Amit. Good afternoon. Let me begin with a disclaimer, which is that I have somewhat of a unique personal stake in this ongoing process of demonetization, because much of the currency that's been invalidated, that's been delegalized, where's my signature? What's been dishonored is my promise to pay the bearer the value of the currency. I don't take it as a dent to my credibility or to my honor, but certainly it's a dent to my self-worth. Let me begin also by letting you know where I stand on this issue. There are two competing arguments. The first argument is that this is a reckless and irresponsible move. In a country where 98% of the transactions are in cash, where hundreds of millions of low-income households depend on the cash economy, where 12%, where cash is 12% of the GDP, you don't go around invalidating currency overnight like at 86%, and is straddling the economy to a sharp showdown. That's irresponsible and reckless. The counter-argument is that all the maladies in India today, poverty, unemployment, corruption, poor governance, crime, all in some sense can be traced back to the black economy, and nothing short of a sledgehammer policy action, like hitting at the heart of the black economy, would serve the purpose. This is a debate that's frowned on moderation. Admittedly, there are costs and benefits. The costs are being experienced today, here and now, and they seem to be quite large. The benefits are uncertain, unquantifiable, and in the long run. So, where you come out on this issue, within the universe of knowledge available today, depends on your judgment. My own judgment is that the long-term benefits outweigh short-term costs, and that the net present value of this is positive. So, having said my disclaimer and my position on the issue, what else do I say? Now, I've spoken a lot about India on several occasions, several forums. It's very difficult to say anything original about India, anywhere, anytime. Much less about a topic like demonetization. There are literally hundreds of articles that are written every day. So what I thought I'd do is raise 5 questions and give my responses to them. The first question is what almost everyone has said, that most of the black money is in other forms, in gold, in property, in foreign currency, in foreign accounts. By demonetization, you're only tilting at the windmills. It's imposing a huge cost on the economy for very doubtful benefits. Shouldn't you be going after other forms of black money? I have 4 responses to that. The first response is that when we talk about the quantum of black money, we're in the realm of speculation. Nobody knows how much of black money is there, much less how much of that is actually in cash. It's unknown, and in some views, unknowable as well. So even the government of India, in their press release, they had to depend on some outdated World Bank estimate of the extent of black economy in India. So nobody really knows. Second, my second response is that there be no a priori assumption that the amount of black money held in cash is small. Around the world, common knowledge is that black money is usually kept, ill-gotten money is usually kept in cash. In fact, there's a book that's come out recently, The Curse of Cash by Kenneth Rogoff, a Harvard professor. He actually advocates demonetization of the $100 bill because he believes that that's the only way to get around the illicit economy in the US and around the world. So it's not clear that the amount of money, black money kept in cash is small. My third response is that the government has indeed gone and attacked other forms of black money. They have listed all that in their press release. They talked about the SIT, Special Investigation Team, law for undisclosed foreign income and assets. They have amended the double taxation agreement in Mauritius and Cyprus, amended the Benami Transaction Act. There was a voluntary disclosure of income that ended in September. And in mid-September, the Prime Minister very pointedly gave a warning, asking everybody to disclose the income, that he will do something drastic. Many people missed that warning. So my own view is that the government played according to a plot, and demonetization came as a logical sequel. My fourth response to that is what my friend Ananta Nageswaran has told me. The Chinese have a saying that you kill a chicken to scare the monkey, and that's an effective strategy. By demonetization, you're probably scaring away all the people who will in the future indulge in black money transactions. So that's my first question. The second question, again very common, is couldn't this have been planned and implemented better? I think that criticism is valid to some extent. Certainly the government could have anticipated the fear and panic, especially among poor people, the rush to banks and ATMs. They could have anticipated the critical dependence of the informal economy on cash, anticipated the many ways in which people will launder money in this transition period. But I also want to say that secrecy is critical to a transaction like this, an operation like this. And having worked in the government and in the Reserve Bank, I am aware of the problems of maintaining secrecy. The more people in the loop, the greater the probability of leakage. And with every additional person brought into the loop, the chance of leakage multiplies in a disproportionate way. And you can't really underestimate the wisdom of the Indian masses, particularly the black money holders. So the government really had to manage this trade-off between maintaining secrecy and elaborate planning. The second criticism under this broad head has been that the government has been tinkering every day. One day they raise the limit, another day slash the limit. One day they allow for marriages, the next day they allow for farmers, etc., etc. But I see that in a positive light. I see that as the flexibility on the part of the government to respond to situations as they arise. The third criticism under this broad head has been that there's been a lot of money laundering going on. After all, there's long lines in front of banks and ATMs, and all the queues represent money laundering, and the street talk is that commissions are going up as much as 30 to 40%. But the question we should ask ourselves is, are all the long lines of low-income households poor people, or is it something else? Again, Ananta pointed to me a study done by 2 professors in the Indian School of Business in Hyderabad. And they've done a calculation saying that if you assume that only the poor people are standing in front of the ATMs and banks, you cannot really expect such long queues, because the poor need no more than 1 or 2 visits to the bank. So much of these long queues are an indication of the extent and volume of money laundering. The government had to tread a very careful balance in this. On the one hand, I believe they had to encourage honest people to fearlessly deposit money, and that's why the finance minister said that if you deposit up to 250,000 rupees, we will not harass you. At the same time, they had to put fear among people who are letting their accounts be used for money laundering. So they had to face this tension between protecting honest people and ruthlessly penalizing dishonest people, and I think they were treading that balance in managing that tension. The third question I want to address is, how do you measure the success of a policy like this? I would look at 3 things, 3 measures of success, or 3 manners in which you can see the success of this. The first measure of success is how much of this delegalized money actually comes back to the banking system. We know that there is 15 trillion rupees of this. And if you look at it, that falls into 4 categories, right? There is money deposited in banks, which is honest. There is money deposited in banks which is admitted to be black, and therefore taxes paid on that. There's money deposited in banks that is not admitted to be black, but investigated and determined by tax authorities to be black afterwards. And finally, there is money that doesn't come back. So by definition, all these 4 components should add to 15 lakh crores, around 15 trillion rupees. It will indeed be a huge embarrassment for the government if all the 15 trillion rupees come back to the banking system and no amount of money is admitted to be black, and tax authorities can't determine any money to be black. Then that would be like Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, and that you have this huge demonetization and no impact. Indications are that about 80% of the money has come back. Some estimates said 65%, but I saw this morning that over 80% has come back. Let's say even if 10% doesn't come back, or within that 10%, some of it actually comes back but is admitted to be black. That's about 1% of GDP. Even if the government collects tax at the rate of 60% on that, you easily have 0.6% of GDP, additional tax as a result of this. So even if much of the money comes back to the banking system, there could still be some benefit by way of expansion of the tax base. The second method by which I'll evaluate the success of this measure is how this improves the economic outlook and governance in the medium term. Not long term, as Amit said, former Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan said in the Parliament that we shouldn't look at the long term because we're all dead. But admittedly, in the short term, there's going to be an impact on GDP, 1 percentage point, 2 percentage points, especially because the big driver of GDP today is consumption, and it is consumption that's going to take a big hit in this demonetization. So I will not attempt for any precision here, but I think the hit to GDP could be up to beyond 1 percentage point. But there will be many advantages in the medium term. They've all been written about how when black economies gets formalized, economic activity will improve and multiply, corruption will go down, governance will improve. We will move up in the ease of doing business calculation, tax base will expand, savings will shift from physical savings to financial savings. We will all shift to digital transactions, will be a huge boost to the efficiency of the economy. The important point to remember is that all of these things will happen maybe a couple of years later. And even analysts, very sharp analysts such as Jahangir, may not be able to map one-to-one all the benefits that will flow through this demonetization move. So my understanding is that the costs will be overestimated, the benefits will be underestimated. But if we take a measured view, I believe that the net present value, the net cost benefit calculus will be positive. The third measure of success of this program is how it will prevent fresh generation of black money. Because virtually everybody has said this, that demonetization only extinguishes black money at a point of time. What's important is to extinguish black money, regeneration of this black money. That's absolutely true. And as somebody said, it's like a game of musical chairs. Once the music starts again, regeneration of black money will start. And two important things: government should prevent generation of black money, and to the extent that there is black money, there must be ruthless, exemplary punishment for those people. And I believe that this demonetization was necessary to send a very strong signal as a strong deterrent. And we have down the line the GST coming, and also technology which will enable audit trail. So I believe that even as this demonetization is a one-time measure, we have the capacity and I hope the will to prevent fresh generation of black money. Do I have 2 more minutes or should I stop? Okay. The fourth question that I want to address is how will or how should demonetization affect the Reserve Bank's monetary policy stance or the government's fiscal stance? My short answer is that it should not affect either the Reserve Bank's monetary stance or the government's fiscal stance. There is no case for that. Of course, there's a lot of liquidity, bond yields have fallen, and the Reserve Bank has taken appropriate action to suck out that liquidity. And going forward, I think they will deliver on the assurance that the Reserve Bank as an institution has given, that they will maintain a neutral structural liquidity position. That is par for the course. But as far as interest rate calibration goes, I don't think it should affect Reserve Bank's policy, because there is no structural hit to the economy. What's happened is a one-time hit, and I think within a year or so, there will be no hysteresis of this. We will get back to the trend growth rate, and I don't believe the Reserve Bank, through the monetary policy instrumentation, should respond to this. Should the government's fiscal stance change as a result of this? I believe not. To the extent that the tax base of the government expands because of this, of course they should use that tax, additional tax, for expenditure on infrastructure, on health and education, etc., which is very desirable and appropriate. But beyond that, I don't believe the government should change its fiscal stance. In particular, there are some people who have written that the informal economy is hit, a lot of people are thrown out of employment, and therefore the government should initiate some counter-cyclical employment programs. I believe I'll be very ill-advised. Someone said there's no such thing as a temporary government program. There's nothing more permanent than a temporary government program. So once we start this, there'll be no end to this. So I believe the government should not do this. The brownie points that India as an economy and the government has earned for its fiscal rectitude has been very hard earned, and I don't think it should squander it away at this point in time, because the economy will adjust. I will stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Subbarao. Thank you very much. I think what Dr. Rao has shared with us, in a sense, roughly sums up the debate in as succinct a fashion as possible. He has brought on the table the arguments and the counter-arguments and the sides and positions that are being taken on this. But obviously this is a subject which is to be discussed in layers and shades. So from Dr. Subbarao, it is now my great pleasure to shift to my left. Dr. Jahangir Aziz, Global Head of Emerging Market Economic Research of the JP Morgan Bank.
Thank you, Amitendu. Thank you, Chairman Pillai, for the invitation, ISAS, and thank you, Dr. Subbarao. I am going to push back on Dr. Subbarao's views, but not immediately. Let me begin by sort of, bringing this thing in, bringing this debate in context. At this juncture of 3 weeks of public debate, angst, anger, much of the way we are reacting to this is out of this built-in frustration that middle India and poor India has been facing every day of not just black economy, but the black money and black activity. And much of what we are doing today in public debate is out of that frustration. But as a colleague of mine pointed out, vengeance is not a development strategy. So let me start off by talking about what is it that we know about demonetization and what is it we don't know. I'm going to begin with an example from physics. So in physics, for about 200-300 years, we know a lot about the physics of big things. So we know a lot about gravity. We have Newton's laws of gravity, Einstein's refinements of that. We send spaceships into the world. We figure out how planets orbit. We know a lot of things about macro variables like pressure and temperature. We have laws of thermodynamics which run machines, which propel spacecrafts. We also know a lot of things about small things. We know for about 100 years, we know a lot of things about quantum mechanics. We use quantum mechanics every day in our lives. Without quantum mechanics, physics, we wouldn't know what semiconductors were. We wouldn't be able to operate our smartphones. But then there's a problem. The problem is that we know very little about how to use these laws of small things to make up the laws of big things. There are physicists who have spent the last 40 years, string theorists especially, trying to bridge the gap, but most of the other physicists are happy working with small things, because life goes on that way, and working with big things, the laws of big things, doing astrophysics, etc. Economics is a bit like that. We know a lot about macro variables. We know a lot about monetary money demand. We know what happens when money supply changes. We know what happens when interest rate changes. What happens to consumption? What happens to growth? What happens to inflation? We know a lot about small things. We know how advertisement affects your life. How small changes in the shelving of in where you place products in a supermarket affects the amount that you buy. The problem is that we know very little about how to take the small things into the big things. Money is one place where we know even less. So if you ask any economist, and there are a whole bunch of them sitting over there, Anand, Udaybir, that is there any, not one, not two, any model of micro theory in economics which explains why people hold money at the individual level? The answer is no. We have barely one theory, 1982, Neil Wallace, who basically said that the only reason why I hold money at the individual level is because the government doesn't allow me to hold anything else. And the question that he asked was that, why would I hold money which gives me zero return when I have all of these instruments that gives me positive return? If I store money, value in money, then forget about inflation. Inflation is going to bring down that value of money every day because inflation is positive, so the real value of that cash goes down every day. But cash doesn't even give me anything. It gives me zero. So why on earth do I hold on to zero? A piece of paper that gives me zero return when I can hold on something that gives me a positive return? The answer, as Neil Wallace very eloquently said, is because the government does not supply you with $5 bonds, $1 bonds, $50 bonds, etc. If you actually were given $5 bonds and $2 bonds and $50 bonds, you would be exchanging, instead of this piece of paper, you would be exchanging those bonds. That's the only reason we as economists know why people hold money. And here we are, making an experiment where we're changing the macro laws to change individual behavior of 1.2 billion people without having any micro theory of why even people hold money. So my first pushback to Dr. Subbarao's argument is the following: that the overwhelming and the dominant argument as to why people hold money in the form of cash is that, or people indulge in black economy, is that it's out of greed. And I will concede that a lot of black economy, lot of black activity is out of greed. But there is a very large part of the so-called black economy that is out of necessity. And here's my example. If I'm sitting in India trying to produce this pencil, and if I have to actually follow all the regulatory requirements of the central government, of the state government, of the municipal government, of the zoning laws, of the environmental requirements of how to get rid of the lead that I don't use, where do I place my factory for making this lead pencil, then pay 35%, 30% corporate tax and 20-25% GST, I'm not going to be able to compete with the Chinese imports. We do not know the extent of Indian manufacturing where it is forced to behave as if it's in a black economy out of necessity than out of greed. And so this experiment, and this is where I disagree with Dr. Subbarao about the long-term benefits. I have no idea what percentage of India's manufacturing can get permanently damaged because they just won't come back. The visual image we have in our head that the black economy is over here and the white economy is over here. So if I expunge this black economy, there will be marginal impact on the white economy, or the black economy will, without any pain, get subsumed by the white economy. It's a very wrong visual image of black and white economy. The world is made up of, like as string theorists will tell you, supply chains. That's what the world is made up. Each supply chain have links, many links. Each of the link has some elements of black economy and some elements of white economy. Go and try do a real estate transaction. There is X% white and Y% black. Every link in every supply chain in India has elements of black economy, elements of white economy. And not all of that, again, is out of greed. A lot of that is out of necessity. So, when you take out quote-unquote black money, and even if the government is successful in doing that, what you don't know is after the experiment is over, how many of those links remain and how many of those links are permanently destroyed. And this is where we as an economist have problems about experiments that neither have any theoretical basis nor any empirical history, neither any history. The only history you can find out is about countries like Myanmar and Zimbabwe, which all had hyperinflation or civil war in which demonetization of this kind took place. And Dr. Subbarao has been the governor, we have another governor over here. If Dr. Subbarao, if I ever went to your office and told you, you know what, Dr. Subbarao, you should reduce money supply by 10% suddenly. would you do it? You wouldn't do that. And if you're not willing to do that, how can you tell me that demonetization, which is equivalent of reducing money supply by 10-15% on a single day, how can that not have unintended consequences about which we don't know anything about? So let me turn a little bit more towards, what is it, what is it that we are sort of how are we looking at demonetization at present? Like Dr. Subbarao said, 82% of the money has come back. Because 82% of the money has come back, we are assuming that most of the money that was in circulation will sooner or later come back. How will it come back? Well, first of all, it has to be deposited into bank deposits, which is exactly where it is going now. And then over the next 6-9 months, that money will be slowly taken out as cash as the Reserve Bank manages to print money at a pace that the people demand. So there is a period of time between now and, let's say, June, July, when people have money deposited in banks and haven't taken out for cash purposes. During that period of time, you have to make the argument either that the demand for that period of time, the cash was going to be used for buying things, that demand is either postponed into, let's say, second half of 2018. Some of it gets permanently destroyed because people lose income. If you can't pay your workers, then those workers do not have money to actually buy things even today or tomorrow, so that demand is destroyed. And if that's the situation, we are in a pretty benign world. So we'll go through 3-4 quarters of lower growth, and as Dr. Subbarao said, life is going to come back. But suppose that the amount of money that gets taken out is actually substantial. Let's say from tomorrow onwards, no more cash is actually deposited back into the system, and let's say 20% of the cash is actually taken out. Then by assumption, there has to be some damage being done to the supply side. And if that damage is permanent, then we lose permanently those supply chains. Permanently, those links in these businesses basically end. And it does not come back. It does not come back not because people do not want to go to online cashless transactions, because they cannot, those transactions in a formal economy are not commercially viable compared to the price that you get to see in AliExpress. The manufacturing world has become literally a world of one price, which is dictated very, very strongly by China in the kind of things that Indian manufacturers compete in. And the only way in which you might be able to survive, the only way a large portion of Indian manufacturing survives is by not paying VAT, not paying corporate tax, and not following any of the very, very costly regulatory and compliance requirements. Now, I've seen a lot of people say, well, this is the first step. We should need to follow this up with removing, reducing corporate tax, moving to GST, reducing regulatory requirements. A bit of chicken and egg problem. If you actually reduce the regulatory requirements, reduce corporate tax, and move to a reasonable rate GST, you will need demonetization in the first place. So my point is that we are essentially forming policies, making decisions almost on a daily basis, literally by the seats of our pants. We have no theory, no empirical evidence, no estimates of how much of manufacturing industry in India actually is forced to go into the black economy because that's the only way it becomes commercially viable. And therefore, my disagreement, Dr. Subbarao, is that I may not know what the benefits are going to be, but right now I have nothing to go by that tells me that the benefits are even going to be positive. Now, if in the benign environment in which instead of 82% of the money coming back, let's say 90% of the money comes back, as you suggested, that's a benign environment. 1% of GDP of black money gets extinguished. pretty good. With three quarters of, demand shock, followed by another 3-4 quarters of recovery. But then you have to ask yourself the question, was it worth it? And I think that's where the uncertainty lies. And as I said, whichever way I look at it, given the fact that I have nothing to go by on as an economist, and given the fact that there are very large areas which can be permanently damaged if forced to go in the formal sector without adequate changes in regulatory environment, without adequate changes in the corporate tax structure or in the GST. I think we might be in for a negative surprise. Thank you.
Thank you, Jahangir. Thank you so much for that expose. Now I turn to our last speaker on the panelists, but certainly not the least, Mr. Abhijit Ghosh, Senior Partner, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and Abhijit is going to bring a practitioner and more effectively a tax perspective on this issue. Abhijit?
So thank you, Amitendu. Thank you, Chairman, and thanks to ICES for inviting me to be a part of the panel where all of them are doctors except me. When 8th November came, somebody tweeted me saying that the world's 2 largest democracy, black is giving way to white. I hope you understand that. There are a couple of interesting perspectives I want to share with you. The first thing is, when I started looking at all the initiative after 8th of November, I realized this is not the first time India has done this. This is the 3rd time India is doing it. The first time it happened in 1946, and then the second time it happened in 1978. And those times they tried to take out of the circulation the 5,000 rupees and the 10,000 rupees notes. And yet the black money and the black economy thrived. So it's a point in perspective that in past we tried it, it didn't work. Will it work? Is a question for future. Now, interestingly, if you look at what Mr. Modi has done, he has given adequate warning right from the day he came to his office. The 2014 he came to office, he immediately after taking charge, he created the special investigation team. All of you are aware of that. And the whole objective was to eradicate the black money and look into the black economy. And then in August 2014, he introduced the Jan Dhan Yojana scheme, which is basically the accounts that everybody can set up, those who do not have an account, a zero balance account with an LIC being thrown in, that you can have a 30,000 rupees worth of life insurance free and an accident insurance of 1 lakh rupees. So that's pretty exciting. So he gave a lot of warnings, and then in September, as Dr. Subbarao mentioned, he gave us very specific warning. So it is not that there was no warning, there was a warning in the system. But the ripple effect of this demonetization really cannot be underestimated. And while sitting here, when Amitendu reached out to me saying, can you say a few words from your perspective, from your client's perspective, from Singapore company's perspective, I said it is important for me to go down to India and find out what's going to happen. So I visited India last week just for 2 days. I went and met up with one of my clients who is a CFO of fast moving consumer goods, and he happily took me out to a rural area just to investigate and find out what's on the ground. So I'll give you some perspective from that angle. So first thing, we visited a farmer, it's a milk producer, and I asked him, how do you feel about demonetization? You know what he said? Well, he's very happy. I said, why? Oh, because the rich are suffering, I'm okay. Okay, so that's the general feeling. The feeling is, so long they are suffering and that's happening, we are all good. That means, I think Mr. Modi's vote bank will be safe. So that's the first fundamental thing I found out. The second fundamental thing is, it happened that one of those days I had to take my mother to the bank, and she is quite old. When I reached the bank, they said, yes, please apply to take out 24,000 rupees. You can only take out 24,000 rupees now, okay? So when I got the token, the bank manager came and said, oh, our money has finished. That was 11 in the morning, okay? So between 10 to 11, all the money is finished in that particular bank. And they say that we only have coins. We don't have 100 rupees, we do not have 50, neither the 2000 rupees. So that's the state. And look at my mother, she is waiting to pay all her bills and the medical expenses. So she is kind of stuck. So I said, you know who to vote next time? And she said, yes, I do, except I do not know who. So that's one set of challenge that India at this point of time is facing. And in the bank officials are extremely busy, believe me, extremely busy. The two persons who were very busy on that day was the guard who was outside because he has put in no cash and he is now responding to all the people who are coming in, no cash, please don't go in. And then the bank manager, those who have gone in, he is being handled by them, correct? But more importantly, all the staff, they are saying, oh, every day we are getting new circulars from Reserve Bank of India. And so every day we are giving new advices to our customers. And we are unable to cope up with this. Because almost every day certain things are coming out and new things are happening. And people who had proper bank account, they are now subject to KYCs, although they have filled up the KYC. Because of new guidelines, new circulars, new things are coming out. And I've seen some of those circulars. So it's really pathetic out there, banking in India at this point of time. The other aspect is, if you look at the low-age workers, and I did talk to, again, some of those who are particularly involved in the real estate side, you know, in the real estate support, they are plumbers, they are ceramic tiles makers, the painters, the handymans. They only collect cash. They never had a bank account in their life. So I asked him, why didn't you have a bank account? You know that Mr. Modi has announced this particular scheme. Sir, I don't trust the bank. Why? Sir, I do not know when I have to go and take it out, because whatever money I collect, half of it I bring it back to my village, and the balance half I pay to my landlord and pay for my utilities all in cash. So what is my incentive first to go to the bank and put that money in the bank? So I would rather prefer to get paid in cash and then spend out everything, because I bring it back to my village. And in my village, my wife or my mother and my parents, they don't have bank accounts. Okay, so why do I remit? So only through a TT format or whatever format they can remit. So that's the system. So if the system is not right, is it right to involve a demonetization program in such a big manner, you know? So you have to have the infrastructure ready, then only you can start thinking. So those are some of the important points to take note of. And the other aspect, I did say that, okay, you can now go for a Paytm. You know, in India they have started the Paytm concept. Many of them say, sir, again, we do not trust. Because first, I do not know whether the money will be credited to my Paytm. And I do not know unless I check. And I do not know how to check. Because I am not educated to see how the banking system works. I am not computer savvy as you are, sir. And that's the brass of the whole issue. Why it may not work in the long run. Because we have not spent time on the education. Because we have not spent time on the infrastructure. And if we do not have all of those, how can such an important program can be rolled out? And that's why now every day, or almost every 5 hours, there are new guidelines, there are new circulars, there are new statements, and it's coming out. So it's really a pathetic state of affair on ground zero. Okay? Now, if you look at the CFO of the company whom I've been talking to, he is happy because everything for him is all in cashless system. He has a smartphone, he pays everything through a smartphone. He knows what to do. But these are the people who are living in the city, who are urban, who are well educated. But in the Indian context, there is a huge volume of people who are in the rural sector, who are not educated enough, and who do not have access to the infrastructure. So you have to take that into cognizance before moving into such kind of an important program. Now, it so happened for the last 1 month almost, the whole of India was busy changing money. Okay, they are not doing anything else. So there's overstocking. There's no production almost. my friend from that fast moving consumer goods company, he said, we are hit by 25 to 40% after we calculate our results in 1st December. And this is going to be a long-term sustained hit for us, because Christmas is coming, a lot of our products do go during the Christmas. We'll be losing that. And we are worried that the other manufacturers from the rest of the world, be it China or elsewhere, they'll just come and take that market away from us. And that's the end of our life in India. The real estate sectors, that's another interesting story. So when I was talking to my clients, a lot of them are in Singapore, have a lot of exposure in India. They are strangely happy, but probably they do not know what's the ground reality. But they are happy because they said, Abhijit, when I used to go to India and I want to make some sale, compared to the local developers who are willing to take cash, we never encourage taking cash. So we always used to lose out if it is a 1-for-1 unit available. Now it's a better level playing field for us. So that's what their logic from a Singapore perspective is what they're thinking about. The other interesting aspect is when India announced the demonetization program on 8th of November, some of the countrymen from the neighboring countries, they started fearing that their countries may be also invoking similar program. And as a result, a lot of cash started coming into Singapore, and so the Singapore fund managers are very busy at this point of time. Now, I think the point which has been mentioned, that the taxation of this cash in hand, what we have seen in the recently, an announcement has been made and a proposal has been made that under a new scheme unveiled by the government, they would like to tax roughly at 49.99%, which works out in the following manner: 30% is the tax, 33% is the surcharge on 30%, plus another 10%, so effectively it comes to 49.99%. So let's say for purpose of our discussion, it's 50% tax. So if you pay 50% tax, your black becomes white. So when I was there in India, I checked around, the going rate is now 30%. So you don't have to go to the government. So government's rate is 50%. The non-government rate is 30%. So if you give them the cash, they will take 30% as commission and give you back the balance in 2,000 rupees. I don't know where that's coming from, but or some other form, you get the money back. Now, that is very interesting, that if you can do that, people will prefer to go into that direction and not necessarily adopt the scheme which has been unveiled by the government. So again, I believe there must be a lot of emphasis on enforcement. Because if you have a scheme and if you do not have enough forces to enforce it and ensure that there are proper checks and balances, then the whole viability of the scheme that is announced will go for a toss. It don't work. Now, if I look at particularly the sector which probably can gain is the companies, the e-commerce companies and the fintech companies. Particularly from a Singapore perspective, they are very eager to see how they can penetrate and support a cashless system. And there are many such companies which are already making plans to support in India if they can. And I understand that some of the states, particularly the state of Union Territory of Goa and then one of the state elsewhere, they have been asked to look at how fast they can move into a cashless operation for the whole of the state or whole of the Union Territory if possible. So from a Singapore perspective, from Singapore investors' perspective, that could be an opportunity. The consumer goods, they are going to suffer. And particularly all the luxury goods, definitely they will suffer. So those who are in that kind of industry, you need to re-strategize, need to rethink, restock your inventory in India and see how long you can sustain without making a significant push into the Indian market. The other flip side is the banks and the FIs, they will stand to gain because they will have more cash back and probably they can do a lot of other investments, but at the same time, they should try to broaden their spread across the country and modernize their offerings. This is the only time, and so this comes back to the point that we do not have enough inroads into the different segments of our population. So these are some of the important aspects which I found out in my course of my discussion last week. And if I look at the non-resident Indians, my friends here, those who have a little bit of money, they are very happy because they can now buy luxury condominiums in Mumbai and Bangalore and elsewhere because the prices are really down. So in short, I think that's the overall perspective. And then when I was working with my colleagues in Singapore, so something very interesting came out. Let's assume, and this is an illustration, let's assume we have a gentleman by the name called Santa and another gentleman by the name obviously Banta. So let's say they are both earning tuition income, tuition fee. You know, tuition fee, nobody pays tax in India, correct? And let's pick up some numbers. So let's say Santa, over last 10 years, he has earned 100 lakhs of rupees, as an example. And he has a personal expense of, let's say, 50%, 50 lakhs. He has spent on his own family, house, etc., which are not deductible, tax deductible. Those are basically personal expenses. You cannot claim a deduction. So effectively, he paid tax over 10 years at 30%, let's assume. So on 100 lakh, he has paid 30 lakhs. So cash in hand at the end of the 10th year is 20 lakhs. 100 lakh, 50 lakh gone for personal expense, 30 lakh gone to the government of India, and so 20 lakhs. So he's cash reached by 20 lakh. Banta, on the other hand, didn't want to pay tax. He didn't file any tax return. But he had the same thing, 100 lakhs, he had a 50 lakhs personal expenditure, so he was sitting pretty with 50 lakhs. Now with this new scheme that the government said, okay, whatever cash you have, you pay 50% of that. So he said, yeah, I want to, because on 50 lakhs, if you pay 50%, which is 25 lakhs, he's left with 25 lakhs, compared to Santa, who is 20 lakhs. Do you understand? The fallacy in the calculation. Not in my calculation, in the government's calculation. And if both Santa and Banta have higher expenditure, Banta stands to gain more. Okay, I agree that as a part of the scheme, the government has said that 25% of after paying tax, you have to put it in a deposit for 4 years, on which the government will not pay you any further tax or interest. But at least it's still yours, correct? So in a way, by not paying tax for the last 10 years, Banta continues to be rich compared to Santa. So with that, I end my session and I hope to pick up more questions during the panel discussion. Thank you.